Argentina is prioritizing social investment to protect the population in the midst of the coronavirus epidemic. The leaders of the European Union remain divided over the response to the COVID-19 pandemic, demonstrating the incapacity of the bloc to deal with the health crisis. Sao Tome and Principe became the 52nd African country to report confirmed COVID-19 cases on Monday. From the headquarters of Telesur English in Havana, Cuba, this is From the South, I'm Katrina Goss. The governor of the Argentinian capital of Buenos Aires, Axel Kicillof, announced on Monday that the funds allocated to the country's school meal service this month will be almost tripled to assist students who are isolated at home due to the novel coronavirus epidemic. The provincial administration explained that in April, 2.6 billion pesos will be allocated to a program to provide food bags to over 1.7 million students in Buenos Aires who are usually provided with meals at school canteens. Kicillof stressed that in the midst of this situation, the state must redouble its commitment to those who need the most support. Brazil, Chile and Ecuador are currently reporting the highest number of COVID-19 cases in the entire Latin American region. According to data from the Brazilian Health Ministry, the COVID-19 death toll has increased to over 430, with 73 deaths reported over the last 24 hours. The figure is the highest for a single day since the first case of COVID-19 was reported in the South American giant. According to the Brazilian government, the number of confirmed cases surpasses 10,000. The Brazilian region most affected by the pandemic is the state of Sao Paulo, the richest and most populated in the country, with more than half of the country's COVID-19 deaths. Chile follows Brazil in terms of the number of cases, while the use of masks will become mandatory in all public transport from Wednesday, April 8th. Chile has reported over 4,800 COVID-19 cases and 37 fatalities. The authorities in Ecuador's most populous city, Guayaquil, say they are handing out 4,000 cardboard coffins amid a shortage of traditional wooden caskets. Funeral services have struggled to cope with the number of people who have died in the city, which is home to 3 million, since the coronavirus pandemic started. The official number of those who have died after contracting the virus nationwide stands at 180, but President Lenin Moreno has said that number probably falls short, as only the cases which have been tested are included. Guayaquil, a port city, has been at the centre of the outbreak, and residents say they have had to wait for days for the dead to be picked up. And our correspondent in Ecuador, Denise Herrera, brings us more details on the situation there.
Ecuador's authorities informed that Ecuador has now 3,747 cases of coronavirus and 191 people have died because of this new coronavirus. In this context, the Ecuadorian authorities are saying that they are taking all the preventive measures to stop with the spread of this new coronavirus around the country. Recently, in a virtual press conference, the Vice Minister of Health, Ernesto Carrasco, said that around 1,600 of the medical staff were infected by this new coronavirus. But now, the Minister of Health, Juan Carlos Ceballos, denied this information. He said that around 417 people of the medical staff were infected by this new coronavirus. Meanwhile, the citizens from Guayaquil are still denouncing that they didn't receive any help from the authorities to stop with the spread in their territories, but they denounced that they didn't help about the people who are dying in Guayaquil. Their relatives are dying in their homes and on the streets, and they say that the authorities didn't help them.
The governor of the Brazilian state of Sao Paulo, João Doria, announced that the lockdown decreed to fight the spread of the novel coronavirus will be extended for another 15 days, as authorities feared they could see over 100,000 COVID-19 deaths.
The quarantine will be extended in Sao Paulo for another 15 days, from April 8th to 22nd.
Será que único presidente da República
Would that be the only president in the world who's right?
é o certo? É quem detém o poder?
Would he be the only one who holds the power, the capacity, the science and the knowledge to disagree with the world? a world that wants to protect lives.
mundo que quer proteger vidas.
Trinidad and Tobago has extended and intensified its stay-at-home measures as the country reported its 8th COVID-19 death and a total of 105 positive patients this Monday.
The government takes the position that the stay-at-home will go until April 30th, and we will take additional action to intensify the compliance of that instruction. Not relax it, intensify the compliance, because that is what is required to deal with the problem that we are dealing with. It is not a question about preserving your comfort zone. It is not a question about preserving your earning capacity. It is not a question about equalizing co-ethnic behavior. It is not a question about accepting and exploiting political opportunity to create mayhem. It is simply a question of whether we live or whether we die.
Over 100 Cuban nurses arrived in Barbados on Sunday night to help in the fight against the novel coronavirus. The members of the Cuban delegation were welcomed at the Grantley Adams International Airport by the Ambassador to CARICOM, David Comisión, and Cuban Ambassador to Barbados, Sergio de Jesus Jorge Pastrana. Minister of Health Jeffrey Bostic said the 100 Cubans would be tested for the virus before taking up their duties. The Health Brigade paid tribute to the martyrs of what is known as the Barbados Crime, a terrorist attack that cost the lives of 73 Cuban civilians in 1976. The Cuban aid comes just after Barbados reported its first COVID-19 death. There were 56 confirmed cases of COVID-19 on the island, while 6 people have recovered from the virus. Venezuela's Vice President of Communications, Tourism and Culture, Jorge Rodriguez, announced during the meeting of the Presidential Commission for the Prevention and Control of the Coronavirus that the quarantine measures will continue during Easter. Rodriguez announced 6 new cases of COVID-19 detected in the last 24 hours. He stressed that if the lockdown measure had not been adopted as early as it was, the current reality in the country would be totally different and regrettable. Rodriguez also announced that in order to prevent any violent acts by paramilitary groups, President Nicolas Maduro decided to apply a curfew in the border municipalities of Simón Bolívar and Pedro María Ureña in the state of Táchira during the operations to repatriate Venezuelans from Colombia. And the Venezuelan Vice President of Communications also announced the capture of 3 paramilitaries and a mercenary trained in camps in Colombia who were planning to generate violence in Venezuela in the midst of the COVID-19 epidemic.
We want to point out that sources of power within the government of Colombia are taking advantage of the generosity of the Bolivarian government and the people of Venezuela and are trying to sneak in paramilitaries, deserters and mercenaries to sow violence in Venezuela. We assumed and suspected that something like that could happen. We want to inform that we are capturing the fingerprints of each person entering the country, and that fingerprint is being compared in real time with the whole database of Venezuelan citizens with IDs, and they are being compared with the records of the police integrated system, and they are being compared with the Interpol database. That is why today we were able to capture 3 paramilitaries whose names we're going to inform tomorrow, as well as the violent gangs they are members of. Also, we'll identify a mercenary who received training in one of the camps we have already revealed.
Venezuelan Foreign Minister Jorge Arreaza made public a letter sent by President Nicolas Maduro to the people of the United States, containing a message of solidarity and a call for peace in the midst of the novel coronavirus pandemic. In the letter, Maduro stressed that Venezuela does not want an armed conflict with the United States, nor will it accept war threats, and urged the American people not to believe the reasons that the Trump administration has cited for attacking Venezuela. The Venezuelan president urged to put a stop to what he described as an attempt by President Trump to misuse his country's institutions for his electoral gain. Trump recently ordered the largest military deployment to the Caribbean region in the last 30 years, under the pretext of fighting drug trafficking. All of this in the midst of the fight against the COVID-19 pandemic. Maduro stressed that Venezuela wants fraternal relations, cooperation, exchange and respect from the US. More stories coming up after this short break, so don't go away. Welcome back to From the South. US Surgeon General Jerome Adams has warned that the United States will experience a moment like Pearl Harbor or 9/11 this week in terms of the number of expected COVID-19 deaths. Adams stressed that this would be the hardest and saddest week in the lives of most Americans. 3 out of 4 US hospitals surveyed are already treating patients with confirmed or suspected COVID-19. A report released on Monday by a federal watchdog agency warns of insufficient tests, slow results, a scarcity of protective gear, a shortage of ventilators for seriously ill patients, and medical personnel working non-stop while anxious about their own safety. And our correspondent in the US, Jorge Gestoso, brings us more details on the situation there.
Thank you. The coronavirus have already reached a mark of 10,000 dead in the US and more than 350,000 cases. And the situation is very, very dramatic. There is a watchdog report made by the Department of Health and Human Resources that shows the lack of equipment at many levels. We're talking about what is called the PPE, the personal protection equipment, that doctors still lack in terms of masks, of gowns, of everything that has to do with their health care and the protection. And also we're talking about that there's a need of medics, doctors. They are needing more doctors in order to deal with this pandemic. Also in terms of equipment, there are not enough test kits. Also ventilators are extremely urgent to have more. In the case of New York, that continues to be the epicenter of the pandemic. In about 2 days, the calculation is they're going to be run out of ventilations. Precisely in New York, it's not only changing the Jacob Javits Convention Center into an emergency hospital with 2,500 beds. Initially it was for non-coronavirus patients. Now it's been also transferred to be a full coronavirus patients hospital, but also they're considering the possibility to do the same with the ship, with the hospital ship, the Comfort. There's another issue here that is the food banks. Most definitely Americans, 30 million Americans in the last 2 weeks lost their jobs and they ran out of money. So the only source of being able to have food is to go to food banks all over the country. They have seen in many occasions an 8-fold increase in the visits to precisely food banks. And most definitely there is an issue in the same thing that is an issue, the homeless. For example, in the case of Los Angeles, 60,000 homeless live every night in the streets, and also about 500,000, half a million in the country. There is a study for 3 universities that they report that it's going to be at least 3,400 homeless that are going to die as a consequence of the coronavirus. We get back to you now.
The governor of the state of New York, Andrew Cuomo, has extended stay-at-home restrictions through this month, citing fresh evidence on Monday that the measure could be helping the state avoid a worse scenario. New York State has reported over 4,700 COVID-19 deaths, with almost 600 reported in the past 24 hours.
The local governments are charged with enforcement. I want them to enforce them. And I want to be, frankly, more aggressive on the enforcement, because all the anecdotal evidence is people are violating it at a higher rate than before. So we're going to increase the potential maximum fine from $500 to $1,000. But it's not really about the fine. Nobody wants the money. We want the compliance. We are serious.
Italy's daily increase in new COVID-19 cases fell once again on Monday, representing the lowest rise in 20 days. Italian civil protection authorities reported that the number of cases rose by 3,599 in the last 24 hours, bringing the overall total to 132,547. Meanwhile, the death toll stands at over 16,500, the highest in the world. Speaking at a news briefing in Rome, officials said the slow in numbers was an indication that the strict lockdown imposed across the country was effective. Coronavirus-related deaths also appear to be falling in Spain, along with the number of new cases. The Spanish Health Ministry reported 637 fatalities in the past 24 hours, the lowest death toll in 13 days, for a total of over 13,000 since the pandemic hit the country. The number of new cases was also the lowest in 2 weeks, bringing the total to over 135,000. The leaders of the European Union remain divided over the response to the COVID-19 pandemic, demonstrating the incapacity of the bloc to deal with the health crisis. German Chancellor Angela Merkel stressed on Monday that the coronavirus pandemic is the biggest test that the European Union has faced in its history, ahead of a key Eurozone finance ministers' conference to draw up an economic rescue plan for the EU. Discussions between EU leaders over what a possible aid package would consist of have seen the nations hardest hit by the health crisis pitted against economically stronger countries. Italy, France and Spain have called on Germany, Austria and the Netherlands to provide means to cushion the economic impact of the virus. As EU leaders continue to fail to find a common strategy to deal not only with the economic but also the wider social impacts of the pandemic, their populations face mass layoffs, the collapse of hospital services and continued risks. China is stepping up measures to prevent a second wave of novel coronavirus infections by enacting more restrictions on daily overseas arrivals. National Health Commission spokesman Mi Feng reported 39 new confirmed cases on Monday, among which one was a domestic case confirmed in Guangdong province. The other 38 were imported cases from abroad, highlighting the need for China to focus on strengthening measures to curb imported cases. Among the measures to prevent the arrival of new cases, authorities have restricted the number of international flights that can land in Beijing and reduced the number of inbound air passengers to less than 3,000 per day. Meanwhile, life in Wuhan, the city where the COVID-19 virus was first identified, continues to return to normal after months of lockdown. Russia confirmed its biggest one-day spike in new COVID-19 cases on Monday at almost 1,000. The novel coronavirus has hit 80 of 85 regions of Russia, while the death toll climbed to 47. Over 400 people have recovered so far, according to Russia's Coronavirus Response Center. The total number of cases nationwide now stands at over 6,300. Moscow, the worst hit part of the country, is home to over two-thirds of its COVID-19 cases. All Russians, except for those working in essential institutions and establishments, are on paid leave until April 30th as part of national efforts to contain the spread of the virus. And we're taking one last break now, but stay with us for more. Welcome back to From the South. The European Union's top diplomat Joseph Borrell stated that the bloc hopes to maintain its military missions in the Balkans and Africa despite the heavy impact of the coronavirus pandemic.
We are making sure that our missions and operations maintains a presence on the ground and continues to conduct their activities as much as it is possible to avoid a negative security impact. The countries and the regions where these missions are deployed are already fragile and affected by instability, and I'm afraid the pandemic is only going to increase this situation.
Sao Tome and Principe became the 52nd African country to report confirmed COVID-19 cases on Monday. Prime Minister Jorge Bom Jesus informed that the island nation had confirmed its first 4 cases after test results returned from nearby Gabon. Lesotho and Comoros are now the only African states that remain virus-free. There are now some 9,500 confirmed COVID-19 cases on the African continent, while over 400 fatalities have been reported and 900 patients have recovered from the virus. The World Health Organization stated on Monday that asking the general public to wear face masks could be justified in areas where hand washing and physical distancing were difficult, but warned that masks alone would not stop the coronavirus from spreading. The WHO Director General also slammed suggestions that Africa should be used as a testing ground for a vaccine as racist.
On the vaccines issue, there was, I think, a comment last week from couple of scientists who said the testing ground for the new vaccines will be Africa. To be honest, I was so appalled, and it was a time when I said, when we needed solidarity, this kind of racist remarks actually would not help. It goes against the solidarity. Africa cannot and will not be a testing ground for any vaccine.
Efforts are ongoing to disinfect areas of the Iraqi capital Baghdad as part of measures to curb the spread of the COVID-19 virus. According to the Iraqi Health Ministry, 56 Iraqis have died and more than 800 others have been infected by the virus. But many experts suggest the real numbers could be much higher, as only a few thousand people from a population of 40 million have been tested. Emergency teams in Ukraine on Monday continued battling a forest fire in the Chernobyl exclusion zone, raising fears of a radiation spike. Police said they tracked down a 27-year-old man suspected of starting the blaze by setting fire to dry grass in the area. Two blazes broke out on Saturday in the area around Chernobyl, which has been sealed off since the 1986 explosion at a nuclear power plant. Firefighters reported that they had managed to put out the smaller of the two fires, which engulfed about 5 hectares, but that the second fire continued burning, covering about 20 hectares. They explained they were using aircraft to extinguish the flames. And we've come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Katrina Goss, and thank you for watching.